Is there anybody here tonight? If you're here tonight, raise your hand. Oh my goodness, so many hands. Do you know what happens when I see so many hands like that? I get really nervous. So can you help me get nervous? If I can sing a song, then I sometimes feel better. Can you help me sing a song? Do any of you know the song "It Isn't Any Trouble to Smile"? Does anybody know? If you know that song, raise your hand. Some of you do it. Okay, will you help me? Here we go. It isn't any trouble just to smile. It isn't any trouble just to smile. If ever you're in trouble, it will vanish like a bubble if you'll only take the trouble just to smile. That was pretty good, but I saw some of you that were not singing. So now you have the words and you know the tune, so everybody can sing this time, right? So let's try it one more time. And it's, by the way, what should be on your face when we sing this song? A what? A smile. So let me see you put on your best smile. All right, here we go. One more time. It isn't any trouble just to smile. It isn't any trouble just to smile. If ever you're in trouble, it will vanish like a bubble if you'll only take the trouble just to. Good job. So thank you so much for making me feel better. So it's Tuesday night. If this is your first night here at VBS, raise your hand really high. Okay, there's a few of you first time, so welcome to VBS. If you've been here before tonight, raise your hand. And welcome back to VBS for all of you. So we are glad you're here on Tuesday night. My name is Balaam. Have you ever heard, any of you have a friend by the name of Balaam? I didn't think so. Oh, we have one in the back. So I'm a prophet, and I'll tell you more about myself a little bit later on. I'm here tonight to tell you about the next leg of Israel's journey toward the Promised Land. Where were the Israelites last night? Very good. They were at Mount Sinai. So now they've left Mount Sinai and they have traveled and they've traveled and they've traveled and they traveled some more. When they got to the wilderness of Paran, God told Moses to send 12 spies into the land. Anybody know how many tribes there are in the nation of Israel? 12 is right. So if there were 12 spies, so how many spies from each tribe? One is right. So one spy from each of the tribes went into the land to spy it out. They spied out the land for 40 days. Did you hear anything last night about 40 days? What did you hear? What was 40 days last night? Very good. Moses on the mountain for 40 days. Well, the spies went into the land to spy it out for 40 days. They brought back big bunches of grapes, and they said that the land was flowing with milk and honey. Now, 10 of the spies, they gave a very bad report. They said that the people of the land were really, really strong, and that they saw giants in the land. And they said, next to those giants, we were like grasshoppers. Can you imagine someone so big that you were like the size of a grasshopper? My goodness. They said, we will not be able to go into the land and take it up. They are too strong for us. We cannot go up. But Joshua and Caleb said that God would give them the land and bring them up into it. But the people rebelled against God and they would not go into the land. How many of you like to sing? I like to sing too. this 12 tribes, the 12 spies going in reminds me of a song. Okay? So we'll learn this song. If you don't know it, we'll sing it twice, okay? So I got to see if I can put my staff down here. Okay, here we go. 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad, 2 were good. 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad, 2 were good. Some saw giants strong and tall, some saw grapes in clusters fall, some saw the Lord's hand in it all. 10 were bad, 2 were good. Have you got it? All right, we're going to do it again. This time we're going to do it a little bit faster, okay? We're only going to do it twice, though. I like to do it about 15 times and get faster every time. But I think we'll just do it one more time tonight, okay? But a little faster. Here we go. 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad, 2 were good. 12 men went to spy on Canaan, 10 were bad, 2 were good. Some saw giants strong and tall, some saw grapes in clusters fall. Some saw the Lord's hand in it all. 10 were bad, 2 were good. Great job. You guys are great singers. I love it. For the punishment for not taking up the land and going in, God made the Israelites wander in the wilderness for 40 years until everyone that was 20 years old or older was dead. So as the years passed and they wandered in the wilderness, they began to die. Anybody who know who Miriam is? Who is it? Very good. Moses' sister. Exactly right. She died in Kadesh. Anybody know who Aaron is? Okay. Very good. Moses' brother. And he died on Mount Hor. Now, you probably remember that as they were wandering, and frequently as they wandered in the wilderness, they would often complain. So one time when they were leaving Mount Hor and they complained, God sent fiery snakes among the camp, and many of the Israelites died. God told Moses to make a fiery snake, and put it on a pole. So Moses made a snake out of brass, and he put it up high on the pole, and anyone that was bitten by the snake could look up at the snake on the pole, and they would live and not die. When the time of the wandering in the wilderness was drawing near, God was with the Israelites, and they began to conquer the land of the Amorites. Now, the children of Israel at this time were a mighty nation. You remember how many people that have been said that they were in number? 600,000 men, is that right? And how many total, guys? All right, maybe 3 million. So they were a mighty, mighty nation, all right? As they wandered through the wilderness, many of the other nations came to be afraid of them because they would fight and win their battles. If they won the battle, who helped them? Very good. God did. So God was with them. They captured cities and they conquered the enemies of God that were attacking them. One of the nations that hurt Israel was known as Moab. When the Moabites saw the great number of people and they heard of their victories, they became very worried. That's where I come in. You remember my name? Who remembers? It's a hard name. Starts with a B. You got it? Very good. Balaam. All right. Now, the name of the king of Moab was Balak. Balak. When he heard how Israel had captured the Amorites, he was very afraid. So he sent princes to find me, and they told me that Balak wanted me to curse Israel so Balak could drive the Israelite people out of his land. I told the men to spend the night, and I would tell them what God would say to me the next morning. In the night, God said to me not to go with these men, that I could not curse Israel because they were a blessed people. So the next morning, I told the princes to go home, that God refused to let me go with them. Do you think Balak was happy about that? I don't think so either. So Balak sent more princes to find me and asked me not to let anything stop me from coming to him. I told them that even if Balak gave me his house full of silver and gold, I could not go with them. So I asked these princes to stay with me for the night so I might know what the Lord would say. God came to me again that night, and he told me to go with these men, but that I had to do whatever God told me to do. So I got up the next morning, and I saddled my donkey, and I was to go with the princes. How many of you have ever ridden a donkey? Anybody ridden a donkey? Two things to know about donkeys if you don't know, if you've never ridden a donkey. Two things to know. One, they are stubborn. And two, it's hard to get them to go where you want them to go. So I got on my donkey, and we rode for a while. We carried on, and we carried on, and we carried on. As I was riding along, all of a sudden, my donkey just turned off of the road and went out into the field. I told you donkeys were hard to steer. Now, you see, God was angry that I was going with these princes, and an angel of the Lord with his sword drawn was standing in the way. Unfortunately, I couldn't see the angel, but my donkey could see the angel, and that's why she turned out into the field. So she turned out, and I was angry, so I hit her, trying to get her to get back on the road. So a second time we went on, and the angel was in the way. Again, I couldn't see the angel, and we were traveling between these two walls, and when she saw the angel, the donkey pushed against one wall and crushed my foot. Have you ever had a donkey crush your foot? Let me tell you, it hurts. So I hit the donkey again, got her back on the road again. So the third time the angel was in the way, and the way was so narrow that the donkey just lay down underneath me. I was stuck. Have you ever been stuck under a donkey? It took me forever to get out from under that donkey. Donkeys are heavy. Then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she started talking to me. Can you imagine my surprise when the donkey started talking to me? I couldn't believe it. A donkey talking? So she asked me, "What have I done to you that you have hit me these 3 times?" Well, I think I forgot to tell you, I was so mad when she fell down underneath me that I hit her with my staff. She wasn't very happy with me. So she asked, "What have I done to you that you hit me these 3 times?" I said, "Because you made a fool out of me. If I had a sword, I would draw it and kill you." The donkey said, "Am I not your donkey, on which you have ridden all your life? Is it a habit for me to do this in this way to you?" Thought about it for a minute. I had to say no, because the donkey had never done that to me before. Then the Lord opened my eyes, and I could see this angel standing with the sword drawn. I fell on my face. Have you ever seen an angel? It was frightening. So I fell on my face. The angel explained that if the donkey had not turned aside these 3 times, the angel would have killed me. I told the angel that I had sinned and asked him if I was supposed to return home. The angel said no, I was to continue on with the princes, but only to speak where I was told to speak. So Balak came out to meet me, and I told him I could only speak the words God put in my mouth. On the next day, we went up to the high places of Baal. I told Balak I would go and come back to tell him what the Lord had said to me. Balak said, "Come and curse Jacob." Jacob was another name for the nation of Israel. I said, "How can I curse whom God has not cursed? And he has blessed the nation of Israel." Balak said, "What have you done? I brought you here to curse my enemies, and you have blessed them." Balak said, "Let's go to another place, and you can curse them from there." I said to Balak, "Stay here while I meet the Lord." And when I came back to him, Balak said, "What has the Lord spoken?" I said, "Behold, I received the commandment to bless, and God has blessed, and I cannot reverse it." Then Balak said, "Then neither curse them nor bless them." So next Balak took me up to the mountain of the top of Mount Peor. I said to Israel, "Blessed are those who bless you, and cursed are those who curse you." Balak became very angry with me. He said, "I have called you to curse my enemies, and you have blessed them these 3 times. So go back to your place." So I went home. Well, I guess that's the end of my story. Tonight we've seen that God continuing to be faithful and defend his people. We've also seen that no one can curse whom God has blessed. And finally, we've seen that God will use whatever means is necessary to get our attention, to show us what he wants us to do, and we've seen that he will use anything or anyone to accomplish his purpose. So think about this. If God can use a donkey, he can use me and you too. So in the drama tonight, you'll learn more about the end of Moses' story. So I hope you'll listen and pay attention carefully. Come back tomorrow night to learn about the Israelites entering the Promised Land and to find out what happens to the city of Jericho. All right, travel safely with your teachers, please.
All right. Good evening again. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Very thankful for your attendance tonight. Thankful to be back with you to study some more of this wondering period of Israel's history. We started on Sunday going over the anxiety and the faithlessness, how easily it is to slip into faithlessness when you're confronted with something that from all natural and human and worldly estimation seems impossible. You can understand, not to excuse, but to explain, you can understand why Israel might look at the Red Sea and say, can't be done. Because by all natural explanation, it could not be done, and yet God does the impossible with ease, and so he split the Red Sea. Yesterday, having crossed the Red Sea, we made our way to Sinai. We received the law, and we studied from that Psalm 78. And we talked about all the ways that that law was not kept. How they were breaking that law before it was even written in stone. But then soon after they got it, they pledged their allegiance to it and then immediately started breaking it in every possible way that they could. And that cycle of rebellion and punishment and repentance and restoration, leading to more rebellion, just continued on. And it really became kind of the hallmark of the Israelite nation and their relationship with God. But fortunately for us, less so for them, there was even then a promise of a better covenant to come, a promise of a better law to come. They had a law that they could not keep, and even if they could have kept it, it couldn't have saved them because it was based around the sacrifice of animals, but animals are not the ones who sinned. It was men who sinned. It was people who sinned. In fact, the very first person who sinned was a perfect person who sinned. Even you, the first time you sinned, you were a perfect person who sinned for the first time. And then from then on, you can never say you were perfect because you will always have been a sinner. You will always have that on your record. So what do? An animal could die for you, but an animal is not a perfect man. Some demented person might say, well, let's offer a child. Let's make a child sacrifice. But a child didn't sin. A perfect adult made a decision to sin. Someone who knew better, someone who was accountable for his actions or her actions, sinned. So we have to find among us a perfect adult sacrifice. Good luck. You might find somebody with a good enough heart willing to sacrifice, but they've also made mistakes. There's only been one person in all of history who was willing to make the sacrifice and who was pure enough for it to matter. And that was when God Himself came down to do it for us in the form of Jesus Christ. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end of tomorrow night's lesson. Tonight, let's begin by summarizing the text of Numbers chapter 13 and 14. And really, it's just this part of it that we're going to analyze. We're going to look at another text. The previous couple of nights in our study, we've used some Psalms as kind of a commentary, using the Bible as its own commentary on these topics. We're not going to go to the Psalms tonight. Tonight, instead, we're going to go to a text in the New Testament, which kind of summarizes the wandering period and the various sins that were committed. But to kind of lead into that, we're going to go to Numbers chapter 13 and 14. Let's open our Bibles there. Let me turn this on. Yeah, there we are. Let's go to Numbers chapter 13. Let's begin reading in verse number 25. Where we are here, as was read to us in the little lesson portion we had a moment ago from Balaam, he recited how the Israelites came to Kadesh Barnea and they sent in the spies. That's where we are right here. So, Numbers 13, verse 25. They returned from searching the land after 40 days, and they went and came to Moses and to Aaron, to all the congregation of the children of Israel, and in the wilderness of Paran unto Kadesh. And they brought back word unto them, and unto all the congregation, and showed them the fruit of the land. And they told them, and they said, we came to the land where you sent us, and surely it flows with milk and honey, and this is the fruit of it. They had literal fruit to say, look how plenteous is this land. Look how overflowing with bounty and with abundance and with great fertility for us to cultivate as farmers and to make not just a temporary home for ourselves, but a permanent dwelling. It is everything God said that it was. It is a true land of promise. Nevertheless, there's always a but. Nevertheless, the people be strong that dwell in the land, and the cities are walled and very great. Moreover, we saw the children of Anak there. Those are like giants, like Goliath-sized people. And the Amalekites dwell in the land of the south, and the Hittites and the Jebusites and the Amorites dwell in the mountains, and the Canaanites dwell by the sea, by the coast of Jordan. And Caleb stilled the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and possess it, for we are well able to overcome it. Caleb was one of those spies. Joshua was with him. They're the ones who were going to give the positive report, but as we have already talked about, they were just 2 out of 12. The other 10 are saying, yes, but there are giants in the land, and there are many giant nations in the land. There are many giant walls in the land, and we are just a small, not so mighty number of people. We are a nation that has not been hardened and tested by battle. We are not a nation that has skilled fighting forces and warriors. We are not a nation whose soldiers are decked out in the best of armor. Our swords are not the sharpest. Our shields are not the stoutest. Our soldiers are not the experienced ones. And you want us to go into this land, we'll be immediately circled. We'll be immediately surrounded. We'll be immediately consumed. We'll go and we'll be fighting against a wall of Jericho, for example, and we'll just be like ants thumping up against brick. We'll have no chance. We'll go up against giant armies of literal giants, and we'll be like grasshoppers thumping us out of their way, laughing at us as we go. We don't stand a chance. Caleb saw all this. Caleb hears their negative summary. Caleb doesn't even bother to refute it. He concedes it's all true. We are small and they are great. They are many and we are few. But let us go up and take it anyway. What is that? The world says that's foolishness. Caleb says that's faithfulness. How did we cross? Did we cross a Red Sea? How did we do that? We didn't build boats. We didn't go the long way around. We walked right through it like it was a dry bridge because that's what it was, because God said split. and split so it did. We didn't make the Red Sea split. We were just the benefactors of God's blessings. Why would that change? So Caleb says, let's take it, in spite of all of its dangers that it possesses. Keep reading Numbers 13:31. But the men that went up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people. That's what Caleb had just said. Let us take it, for we are well able to overcome it. And these men say, we are not able to go up against this people. They are stronger than we. And so they brought this evil report of the land which they had searched to the children of Israel. And they said, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eats up the inhabitants thereof. And all the people that we saw in it are men of great stature. And we saw giants, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and were in our sight like grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. We don't have a chance. There's no way on earth we are taking an inch of this land. And you know what? They're right. There's no way on earth that little bitty nation, that tiny little insignificant nation, was going to take a square inch of that Canaanite land. There was no way on earth that nation was going to stand up to one of those nations, one of those armies, one of those walled cities. They did not have a chance on earth. They had a guarantee from heaven, though, and that's all that matters. But they weren't seeing that. These are the same ones, the same kind of ones, who saw the Red Sea, and they said, there's no way on earth we're crossing this sea. And they were right. Their way was not on earth. Their way was in heaven. But they didn't see that. They had eyes of the world, not eyes of heaven. God saw a Red Sea and said, split. God sees giants and he says, they're grasshoppers to me. God sees armies and he says, they're nothing. God sees walled cities and he says, I'll knock them down with some trumpets. We'll get there tomorrow night. They're nothing to God. But to the ones who are looking with eyes of the world and not with eyes of faith, they're everything. And so they panic. They're scared. They deliver this negative report. And they basically, though they should not have, they basically leave it to the people to decide what they're going to do. I'm sorry, I wasn't aware this was a democracy. It never has been. We are a part of an absolute monarchy. God is the king. Moses is just the guy running the show down here. God is the king. This is not open for a vote, but they basically leave it up to the people to decide, what are we going to do? There's giants in the land. We don't stand a chance, do we? Keep going. Turn the page over to Numbers 14, beginning in verse 1. And all the congregation lifted up their voice, and they cried, and the people wept that night. And the children of Israel murmured against Moses and against Aaron, and the whole congregation said unto them, would God that we had died in the land of Egypt. Oh, how I wish we had died way back then. Or would God, oh, how we wish to God that we had died in this wilderness. And wherefore has God brought us into this land? To fall by the sword, that our wives and our children should be prey? Were it not better for us to return to Egypt, that is to say, while we still have our heads on us? Verse 4, and they said one to the other, let's make a captain, and let's return to Egypt. Let's get somebody to lead us, the king of the cowards, to take us back to where we were before. Let's jump down a little bit in the narrative, down to verse 22. Because all those men, which this is God speaking, because all those men who have seen my glory and my miracles, which I did in Egypt and in the wilderness, and have now, my Bible says, tempted me, have thumbed their nose at me, have thumped at me, have dared me to do something about it, have tested me, your Bible might say, these 10 times, and have not hearkened to my voice, surely they shall not see the land which I swore unto their fathers, neither shall any of them that provoked me see it. But my servant Caleb, because he had another spirit with him, that is, he had a different attitude, a positive one, and has followed me fully, him will I bring into the land whereunto he went, and his seed shall possess it. Little parenthetical, now the Amorites and the Canaanites dwelt in the valley. Anyway, tomorrow you will turn, and you'll get to the wilderness by way of the Red Sea. There's a little bit more reading, but just to pause for a second there. I want you to see the poetic justice of God here. There's all kinds of ways you could punish the people for their disbelief and their lack of faith in God. God very much, throughout the Old Testament in particular, favors a kind of poetic justice. If you do this, you'll get that, and it'll have kind of a symmetry to it. Eye for an eye is poetic justice. You take that, you lose the same equivalent thereof. So these faithless people, and what were they faithless? What was the specifics? We cannot have this land, they said. We cannot take this land. We will never have this land because of all those negative things that are in there. So God says, all right, your punishment will be, you won't have the land. I don't know why you'd be upset about that. You didn't think you could, so you won't. That's poetic justice. Caleb says he will, and through me he will. And so will Joshua and those that come after. Keep reading, starting in verse 26. The Lord spoke unto Moses and Aaron, saying, How long shall I bear with this evil congregation, which murmur against me? I have heard the murmurings of the children of Israel, which they murmur against me. Say to them, quote, As truly as I live, that's God taking a vow against himself. As I live, says the Lord, as you have spoken in my ears, so will I do to you, poetic justice. Your carcasses shall fall in this wilderness, all that were numbered of you, according to the whole number, from 20 years old and up, who have murmured against me. Doubtless you shall not come into the land, concerning which I swore to make you dwell therein, except for Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. But your little ones, who you said would be a prey, you said they were too small, they were too in danger, they were too insignificant, they would be the first ones to go, they're going to be the first ones in. Them will I bring in. They shall know the land which you have despised. But as for you, your carcasses will fall in this wilderness, and your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years, and bear your whoredoms until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. One last thought of introduction before we go to the proper study of the wandering and the sins they committed along the way. God makes a reference here. He says, 10 times they provoked me. You could probably come up with a list of 10. It's probably more than 10 that's recorded in Exodus, Leviticus, and Numbers, but here's a list of 10 for you. They lacked faith before crossing the Red Sea. Provocation 1. They complained over the bitter water at Marah. They complained in the desert of Sin. They collected more manna than they were supposed to. They attempted to collect extra manna on the Sabbath. They complained over the lack of water at Rephidim. They engaged in idolatry in the golden calf. They complained at Taberah. They complained again over the lack of food. And they failed to trust God when they got to the edge of the promised land. Along the way, complaint after complaint, problem after problem, sin after sin, lack of faith after lack of faith. Along the way, still, they moved closer and closer and closer to the promised land. At no point did God turn them around. At no point, as parents say, I'm going to turn this car around, go right back where it came from. That's what they wanted, and God wasn't going to give them that. You're going to get the promised land, God kept saying, because I promised it. That's why it's called that. I promised it. I'm going to get you there. I made that vow to Abraham. His descendants are going to take this land. So you keep sinning, and I punish you, but even as I punish you for your sin, we keep inching closer. And now, we're here. We've arrived. We're at the gates that say promised land. We've made it. And now, still, after all that I've done for you to get you to this point, still you complain to a people that hard-hearted, to a people that devoted to faithlessness, where their God is pessimism. God is merciful, but enough's enough. At some point, you just got to pull over and spank your kids. And that's what God does. To illustrate that, let's open our Bibles to 1 Corinthians chapter 10. Let's learn from history. 1 Corinthians chapter 10. We're going to be at the top of the chapter here in just a second. We could just stay in Numbers. And I could just flip every couple of pages and give you a quick summary, every couple of pages and give you a quick summary. And after 45 minutes, we could have a pretty good summary. We could probably get through most of Numbers, if not all of it, and get a little bit into a bit of Deuteronomy, and our time would be done. And we would have recited the account. I would rather learn from the account. And that's what the Old Testament is there for. It is not there for our memorization. The Old Testament was written for our learning, so that we, through patience and comfort in so reading it, might have hope. So let's use the Old Testament to learn from it. That's exactly what Paul does here in 1 Corinthians 10. God, through this text, Paul talks about how God provided for his people as he provides for us, how the people rebelled against God, as we sometimes do, and he warns us against it, and how the lesson we need to learn is right there. From their example, we learn a lesson in our life with God. Let's begin with the first 4 verses of 1 Corinthians 10. Paul writes, Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be ignorant concerning how all of our ancestors were under the cloud and all passed through the sea, and were all baptized unto Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and did eat the same spiritual meat, and did drink the same spiritual drink, for they drank of the spiritual rock, capital R, that followed them, and that rock was Christ. My brethren, I want to give you a history lesson from which we can learn something about God and something about our relationship with God. I want you to consider how our ancestors were led by God along the way in spite of their faithlessness and in spite of their sins, how God dealt with them in their sins on their way to the promised land, to the point where they had to lose the promised land after they pushed his last buttons. Let's learn from this example as he describes here when they were baptized unto Moses. Well, that's the Red Sea crossing. He calls it a baptism. I think we talked about this maybe last year, but it's been a year, so give me a second. It's called the baptism of Moses because they were completely surrounded. That's what the word baptism means. It means a covering. It means an immersion. It doesn't have to be necessarily in water. The whole point of the Red Sea crossing is you don't get wet. And yet it's still called a baptism. Why? Because if I'm an Israelite crossing the Red Sea, what do I see around me? I see behind me the Egyptian army trying to kill me or retake me, but they're being held at bay by a pillar of fire, which God has provided. I look below me, and what do I see? I should see water that is drowning me, but instead it's dry ground, which God has provided. I look to the left and to the right of me, and what do I see? I see a wall of water that should be crushing me, but instead is held at bay, again by the power of God, which He has provided for me. I look above me, and what do I see? I see a cloud, which God has provided to lead me. Ahead of me, what do I see? A land of promise, which God has provided for me. Every single direction that I might turn, I am surrounded by God's provisions, what God has done for me. I have been baptized with Moses leading me. Thus the baptism of Moses in the cloud and in the sea. And they ate the same spiritual meat. They didn't go hunting for food. God provided for them their food. They drank a spiritual drink. That is not to say it was a drink that was metaphorical. It was a drink that was provided for them by God, the Spirit. That drink that was provided for them was the rock, which is Christ. On one occasion, the people cried at Rephidim and begged for water. And God said to Moses, Moses, there's a rock nearby. I want you to speak to it. Oh, sorry, no, that comes later. I want you to strike the rock with your staff. Moses, I want you to go to this rock. It seems like just an ordinary rock sticking up out of the ground. And I want you to strike the rock with your staff. And when you do, water will come out. Listen, that shouldn't happen. 99 times out of 100, that won't happen. But this time, because God made it so, Moses strikes the rock and out flows water. The rock, Paul says, was Christ. Well, Jesus isn't a stone. Jesus isn't a rock. But Jesus, that rock, was a type of Christ. Christ is that which from His being struck flows living water, as He says to the woman at the well in John chapter 4, as He'll say in John chapter 7, which we're actually going to study here in a minute. He says, out of me will flow fountains of living water, and out of you will flow the same if you come unto me. Moses, in striking the rock, establishes a anti-type relationship. Moses himself is a type of Christ. Christ is the anti-type of Moses. He's a type of Christ. He's a lawgiver. He's a leader. He's a provider. He's someone who will take you to the promised land. Those all things represent what Jesus would do in a greater way. Aaron is a type of Christ. The Israelite nation is a type of the church of Christ. Those kind of relationships and shadows and fulfillments in the Old Testament to the New are replete in the Old Testament. This rock, Paul specifically says, was Christ. Not literally, but a type of Christ. And when you strike Christ, from Christ flows living water. Moses struck the rock from which flowed water. But then you come to a little bit later, and the people are grumbling and complaining and wanting water. And God says, Moses, I can see you're a little hot-headed. I want you just to speak to the rock. I want you to say to the rock, give forth water, something like that. And then the water will come out. Moses, how was that? His boiling point. Takes his staff, which God did not tell him to do, rears it back, which God did not tell him to do, and strikes the rock. Now we're many miles away from Rephidim. We're near Kadesh. We're a totally different part of the map. He strikes a rock that God said, this rock here, Moses, is going to produce water. I want you to speak to it. But he doesn't speak to it. He's mad. He says, must we fetch water for you? I'm sorry, whoa, what's this we stuff? God doesn't need you. You're just along for the ride. You're just the guy I chose. God's doing this. Moses isn't doing this. But he's angry. He speaks out of turn. Must we fetch water for you? You spoiled, ungrateful babies. And he strikes the rock. It produces water because God's a provider in spite of the sin of his leaders sometimes. But Moses, God says, because you did not believe me, you will not enter the promised land. The reason Moses does not enter the promised land, the reason Moses dies on Mount Nebo and doesn't enter in, is because he struck the rock when God said to speak to the rock. It seems like such a minor thing. It seems like such a little thing. Paul says that Moses struck the rock. The rock was struck. The rock was Christ. The Moses account in Numbers says that when Moses struck the rock in Numbers 20, that he struck the rock twice. I don't think that means he went bang, bang I think it means he struck the rock like he'd done before. And that makes 2 times now he struck the rock. Once in Rephidim and once near Kadesh. Twice now he struck the rock. God only said he struck the rock once. Why? Because the rock is a type of Christ. And he's only going to be struck once. He's only going to be crucified once. You struck him twice. You ruined the type. You ruined the image. You ruined the shadow. You ruined the whole picture I was painting with that rock, Moses. No promised land for you. That rock is Christ. That rock followed them, Paul says. Not literally. It's not the literal same rock. It was Christ in representational form, following the people so that whenever they needed him, he was there to provide for them, as Jesus is for us. Moses, in his anger, shattered that whole typology by striking the rock a second time. The rock followed them. The point is, God provided for them. Keep reading a little bit in 1 Corinthians chapter 10, starting in verse 5. But with many of them, those Israelites, God was not pleased. They were overthrown in the wilderness. Now those things, their being overthrown, all that they did to provoke God, became for us examples, to the intent that we should not, a whole list of things, learn not to do, first of which is to the intent that we should not lust after evil things, as some of them also lusted. The Israelites wanted Egypt. The Israelites wanted the comforts of the world. The Israelites said, let's go back to what we were familiar with. Let's go back to what we knew. Let's not go forward into the scary unknown where there's giants in the land. Let's go back. Yes, it's to slavery, but at least we know the land. At least we know the people. At least we know the culture. I'm used to it. I'm familiar to it. Let's go back. They yearned for evil things. We had food there. We had comfort there. We had a bed there. Yes, but you also were slaves there. Like that does not make it equal to a pillow and baked beans, or whatever it is you think you were going to get back in Egypt. And I promise you, Pharaoh was not going to be very happy with you if you came crawling back. It's going to be right back to the pits with you. But they weren't thinking straight, as people still do today. People who claim to follow God, but who want what they had before. They want salvation while having the world. Don't lust after evil things. Don't crave the sin of the world. Move forward into the unknown with God, with faith, and He'll lead you somewhere better. Verse 7, neither be idolaters, as some of them were, as it is written, quote, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. The reference there, Exodus 20, all the way up to Exodus 32 or so. As the people receive the 10 Commandments, and Moses goes away to have it chiseled in stone for them, they get antsy, they get worried, they get nervous. Moses isn't coming, so let's make a god. They didn't want, when they made the golden calf, they didn't want to say, let's make a different God than Jehovah. They weren't saying, let's make a different God than Yahweh. They weren't saying, let's make a different God than the big booming voice that is terrifying us right now. They were saying, that big booming voice, I guess the mountain was over here last night, that big booming voice, that big scary voice is too scary for us. Let's make a God through which that God can speak to us. That's what an idol is, an image, an icon, a representation of the God. Let's make a representation of Yahweh, a representation of the big, thunderous, booming sky voice that's terrifying us. Let's make something that can speak for us that's not so scary. Well, of course a golden calf isn't scary. It's just gold. You watched it be made. Why would that be a god? Why would that be a thing to worship? Why would that be the thing you would worship? Of course it's big, booming, and scary. He spoke the universe into existence. His voice is necessarily going to give you chills. You should be in awe of that, and you should be thankful that that big, scary voice says, I'll be your God. They weren't thinking that way. They said, let's make our own God to speak for us in His place. And once you start making rules for yourself and making gods for yourself, everything goes out the window. They rose up to eat and drink and play and sin left and right. Don't commit idolatry. You don't have to make a golden calf to commit idolatry. Don't put something else ahead of God. Don't let something else speak instead of God. Or that voice that'll be speaking instead of God will be your voice. And your voice has a tendency always to tell you what you want to hear. How convenient. Don't do that. Verse 8, neither let us commit fornication, as some of them committed, and fell in one day 3 and 20,000. Numbers 25 is the reference here. The children of Israel are deep into the region now, having crossed the Red Sea. There's nations all around them, and God has already had to warn them, you stay away from those other nations. Well, not only did they not stay away, they got way too close for comfort, and God had to punish them. 23,000 fell in one day. Do not love the world, neither the things that are in the world. For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the vain pride of life, those things lead to condemnation. It's not a coincidence. It's not repetition for the sake of it. The two of those three are associated with the word lust. Do not be drawn by the allure of what you can see in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, which appeal to the vainness and the pride of people. I want this. This is good for me. This is helpful to me. This feels good to me. That leads you away from God. Don't follow that. Verse 9, 1 Corinthians 10. Neither let us tempt Christ. Again, my Bible says, thumb the nose at Christ. Neither let us spit in the eye of Christ. God, not necessarily Christ the Messiah, but in the Israelites' day, just God. Don't let us dare God. Don't take advantage of God's mercy. Don't say, God, you're not merciful. You're just a wimp. Because that's what you're saying. I don't believe you're merciful. I just believe you can't really do anything. And so you're just coding that inability to do anything to punish me by saying, I'll just be merciful to you and not punish you. Don't dare God to punish you. Because you know what He'll do? Punish you. And He can make it hurt. Let us not tempt God. Let's not thumb our nose at God, as some of them did, and were destroyed of serpents. Again, that was referenced to us in the reading we had a little bit ago. They dared God. They tempted God. And God said, you're going to be stricken with the disease that'll kill you if you don't do what I say. Which is such a bizarre and odd thing, the whole circumstance of the brazen serpent and how it was erected and what it meant. But all of it we see with clarity in the New Testament when Jesus alludes to it in John 3. Moses lifted up the serpent, and the people who looked to it were saved. So must the Son of Man be lifted up. Those who look to Him will be saved too. John 8, when the Son of Man is lifted up, people will be saved. So that brazen serpent was there to be a type, to represent what Jesus would be for us. And that was Numbers 21. Verse 10, 1 Corinthians 10, neither murmur ye, as some of them also murmured and were destroyed of the destroyer. The word murmur is an automatopoeia, which is a word that sounds like what it is. Like the word car is not that. Car is a car. Car doesn't sound like car. Car sounds like vroom. Vroom sounds like vroom. Meow sounds like meow. Murmur sounds like murmur. If you've ever heard a murmuring, it sounds like that. You don't hear specific objections to what is being said. But if a speaker says something controversial, if a speaker says something wrong, and no one is willing to stand up and loudly say, that's wrong, what usually happens is people lean over and say, did I hear that right? Did he say that? Is he really saying that? And it just kind of reverberates through the crowd. That little murmur. Do not stand back there and talk about God as if He can't hear you. Do not stand back there and murmur and whisper and conspire against, as though God can't hear your very thoughts before you even murmur them. You don't have to whisper them. You don't have to shout them when they're even in here. Before they ever get out here, God has already heard them. And He's already angry at you for thinking them. If you dwell on them, sometimes thoughts just pop in there and you can't help that, but immediately you suppress them. But when you let them stew and you let them fester and you start to think about how you're going to implement those thoughts, then God is already saying, that's sin. Before you ever say or act on it, you're stewing over it, you're dwelling on it. It's about to come out of your mouth as a whisper, a conspiratorial whisper, a murmur, a desire to overthrow the order of things that God has established. Don't do that. God will overthrow you. All these things, Paul says, were for us examples. They are written for our admonition, our stern warning learning, unto whom, that's us, the ends of the world are come. What he means by that is, you have Israel back then. There was another nation still to come, another nation of God. That's the kingdom of Jesus Christ. So there was always another nation that was going to look back on the mistakes of Israel and learn from them. But we're it. We're the nation of God. There is no other. There's no other nation that's going to look back on our mistakes and learn what not to do. That's for us to do for the past generation. The ends of the world are come to us. We're it. Learn the past lesson. Learn from history. Wherefore let him, here's the lesson to summarize it all, let him that thinks he stands, let him that thinks he stands alone, let him that thinks he stands without God take heed. You will fall. Israel said, we can't take this land. They meant without God. They were leaving God out of it. They weren't appealing to God. They were pretending God wasn't in the picture. We cannot take this land. So God said, yep, you can't and you won't, because you choose not to let me be a part of it. Let him that thinks he stands alone take heed lest he fall. There is no temptation taking you but such as common to man. But God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted above what you're able, but will with the temptation make a way of escape so that you may be able to bear it. What is the way of escape out of temptation? It is not different for every temptation. It's the same solution for every temptation. The temptation that Israel faced at the edge of the promised land of Kadesh Barnea was trust God in the face of giants, in the face of big walled cities, in the face of mighty nations. Trust God. The temptation was, don't trust God. Wouldn't it be easier to go back to what you knew than to go forward into the unknown with God? That was the temptation. What's the way out of that temptation? God is faithful. 1 Corinthians 10:13. It's right there in the middle of the text. God is faithful. He will provide a way of escape. What's the way of escape out of every temptation? His faithfulness. Rely on Him, lean closer to Him, draw near to Him, and the tempter will flee from you. So wherefore, my dearly beloved, flee from idolatry and murmuring and fornication and all the other sins that are listed there. He's already listed there. Flee from those sins. Learn from the past. Lean on God, and you'll be okay. Now, we have some time left, so let's talk about the Feast of Booths. The what? Let's talk about Sukkot, which is the celebration of the end of the wandering. The Israelites had 3, and then later on Hanukkah came along 4, but before that, originally 3 big holidays they celebrated. Passover, and these are the ones where all the Jewish males would come up to Jerusalem to take part in them, usually take their families with them. Passover was the first one on the calendar. After that, 50 days later, they celebrated Pentecost. They celebrated freedom from punishment, from slavery. They celebrated the giving of the law, and then a little bit later, toward the fall time of the year, they celebrated Sukkot. They celebrated the Feast of Booths. They celebrated not the wandering. The wandering was a period of shame. They were never supposed to wander. They were supposed to go straight into the promised land, knock the walls down, and take it all for themselves. But they had no faith. And so God says, you don't have faith? You'll wander for 40 years, circle around it for a little while till you're all dead, and the next generation will take it. The Feast of Booths was a celebration of God keeping that promise. At the end of the 40 years, they went into the land, and they just took it like it was nothing, which is what they should have done 40 years ago. The Feast of Booths was the celebration of God giving them the promised land at the end of the wandering, at the end of that shameful period. So let's open our Bibles to a text where this Feast of Booths, this celebration of the end of the wandering, is the backdrop. And that text is John chapter 7. Open your Bibles there, please. John chapter 7. And what I want to learn from this, I want to make application from this, is what our Master does when He goes up to Jerusalem, as every Jewish male would do, to celebrate the Feast of Booths, and how He would take the opportunity to once again teach His people who He is, and how He uses His messianic nature. He uses His kingship as a perfect segue out of this Feast of Booths time, out of everything that the people are going to be celebrating right now. So look at John chapter 7. Let's start by reading the first 5 verses. After these things, Jesus walked in Galilee up in the north, because He would not go in Jewry, that is the south, Judea, because the Jews sought to kill Him. Now the Jews' Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths, Sukkot, this holiday, was at hand. His brethren therefore said to Him, Depart and go to Judea, so that your disciples may see the works that you do. For there is no man that does anything in secret, for he himself seeks to be known openly. If you do these things, show yourself to the world, for neither, John adds his commentary, neither did his brothers believe in Him. This is the rejected Jesus. The Jewish leaders are trying to kill Him already. Rejection number 1. Why? Because He claims to be the Messiah. The autumn feast is coming. The celebration at the end of the wandering is coming up. Jesus is naturally going to take part in keeping with the law. It's in the law. You must go up and you must celebrate it. So He's going to do that. His half-brothers, the other sons of Mary and sons of Joseph, want Him to leave already. Stop hiding, because they make the assumption that if you really were the Messiah, you'd show yourself openly. Well, hey, you don't know the will of God. You don't know how this is going down. They assume that. It's a false assumption. And John tells us, rejection number 2, neither do His brothers, at least at this point in time, believe Him when He says He's the Messiah. They've grown up with Him. They're younger than He is. They were born after Him, but they've spent their lives with Him. They don't see Him as this messianic figure. They see Him as the carpenter's son. They see Him as their older brother. They don't believe Him that He's the Messiah. Go up and show yourself if you really are who you claim to be. Rejection number 2. Eventually He does go up to the feast, and He hears the people murmuring about Him. Verse number 12. When His brethren were gone up, then also went Jesus to the feast, not openly, but in secret. And the Jews sought Him at the feast, and they said, quote, Where is He? And there was much murmuring among the people concerning Him. Some said, He's a good man. Others said, No, He deceives the people. That's the Pharisees doing their work, doing their best to mitigate his influence while they tried to arrest him and kill him. And so some people were buying into it. Here is this man who supposedly has done miracles. Already he has done many miracles, but not everybody is bearing witness to them. So he's just this great figure of notoriety. He's this figure of mystery. And some say he's a good man. Not the Messiah, but he's a good man. He's a nice person. He means well. I don't know if he really is what he says he is, but he means well. He's a good guy. Others say, how can he be a good guy if he's a liar? And everyone tells me he's a liar. And so there is this argument, this dispute among them. And Jesus is just kind of in the background, just listening to some of the people rejecting him. And even the ones not outright rejecting him, also not really embracing him. Rejection, though, is kind of all over the air. Some say he's a liar. That's another rejection. But he keeps on preaching. Verse number 20, 19 and 20. He's preaching now, and he says, quote, "Did not Moses give you the law, and yet none of you keep the law? Why do you go about to kill me?" And the people answer and say, "You have a devil. You're nuts. You're possessed. You're crazy." Rejection of the people. Who's trying to kill you? Well, they haven't been keeping up with the times, because already the Pharisees have lifted up stones intending to kill him, and Jesus has just slipped away from them. Multiple times they've already tried to kill him. He's not being paranoid. It's not paranoia if everyone really is out to get you, and they were out to get Jesus. But he's not saying this out of fear or even frustration, but rather just to call them out on their hypocrisy. People are trying to kill me, and what do you think of that? And they say, "You're crazy. No one's trying to kill you." They don't even try to justify it. They just deny it. Rejection of his peers, rejection of his brothers, rejection of his leaders, rejection of his students who he's there teaching. They all turn against him. Boom, 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 boom. A machine gun rattling of rejection. So that's your foundation. That's where we are right now with Jesus. He's up in Jerusalem. We're here to celebrate the Feast of Booths, and everyone left and right are turning against him. Jump down to verse 37 of John 7. In the last day, the great day of the feast, Jesus stood and cried, saying, quote, "If any man thirst, let him come unto me and drink." To appreciate that and the significance of that at the moment in time in which he said that, let's take a second and appreciate what went on during the Feast of Booths. As I say, this is the celebration of the end of the wandering. Why is it called the Feast of Booths? Because during this week-long affair, the Israelite people in Jerusalem would build for themselves little makeshift houses, booths. They would build out of palm and myrtle branches. They have their homes right there, but outside their homes, they'd build these little makeshift houses with a little square window at the top so they could see the stars at night. And that's where they'd sleep. And that's where they'd live out of for a week. And this is so strange. And naturally, the children would ask their parents and say, "Dad, why are we sleeping here? What's wrong with our house?" And that would be the opportunity. That'd be the opening for the parents to say, "I'll tell you why we're out here this week. Because this week we're remembering how God led our ancestors. While our ancestors were not living in this promised land of ours, when they were living out in the wilderness, wandering because of their faithlessness, that while they were wandering, God led them and never abandoned them and never gave up on them. And they had to build these little makeshift houses that they could quickly tear down and quickly rebuild wherever they were moving, on the move as nomadic people, constantly being led by God. And they would look up at night and they would see the stars as we can see now through our little window. And we could see the maker of the stars, Psalm 8. And so a father would have the opportunity and a mother would have the opportunity to teach their children how God led them through the wilderness. Every night when they would climb into their huts, their little makeshift tents, their little booths, they were reminded of their wandering wilderness ancestors and of the leadership of God who never abandoned them despite all their many sins against him. And then, on the last day, the great day of the feast, they tear down their booths for the last time. Now, one more thing. During the week, there was a ceremony at the temple, at the hill, Mount Moriah, and so forth. Throughout the week, the priests would go to the pool of Siloam and they would fill water in golden jugs. And they would make a procession, and they would lead this procession of these jugs outside in the temple court where all the people would be gathered. And they would pour the water out onto the pavement, in so doing symbolizing and reminding the people how God once produced water from a rock. And they would read and they would recite in a kind of a call and response kind of way. The priest would read a line from the Hallel Psalms, the great Hallelujah Psalms, the Messianic Psalms. They would read a line that people would recite it back to them, and they'd go back and forth for like 8 Psalms. They would do this, back and forth, reminding themselves not just that God has provided, not just looking back at what God has done, but looking forward to the promise of a Messiah who would come. The real climax of that Hallel Psalm section is the stone, the rock that the builders have rejected has become the chief cornerstone. Or blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. These are messianic references. So you're not just looking backward at the wandering, you're looking forward at the messianic coming. And so the priests and the people would share in this call and response sort of ceremony all throughout the week. But on the last day, the great day of the feast, this was the special occasion. Because now you tear down your little palm branch hut, and you would take the palm branches with you. And the children would have their little palm branch with them. It would look like this. They'd have their little palm branch with them, and they would walk up to the temple together, and the priest would come, but their bowls, their jars would be empty. They'd have no water to pour out, because the Messiah has not yet come. The one who would pour out living water has not yet come, and so they have no bowls. They have no jars to pour out any water this time. But they would read the call and the response, and then there'd be a moment of silence. There'd be this quiet that would fall over the people, and they're holding their palm branches. They're anxious, like children on Christmas morning ready to rip open their presents. And then finally somebody would move first. And what they would do is they would take their palm branches. They wouldn't offer them on the altar. No formal ceremony, no solemnness here. No, this is a celebration. They would take their palm branches, and they would, like a rock star with a guitar, they would swing it back and they would crash it against the ground, and it would just be this explosion of green confetti. And then all the people would start cheering and hooping and hollering and shouting hallelujah, and they'd start smashing their palm branches and destroying them, because we don't need them anymore. We don't have to sleep here. We don't have to sleep in huts. We don't have to sleep in palm houses. We have a permanent dwelling place here. We're home. The Savior, God, has brought us to the promised land. So we can end the wandering. We can now be home permanently here. We can destroy our palm branches and be home and celebrate and rejoice that God is a provider. God is a bringer-homer of His people. And this great celebration would take place. The children would get all excited. The children would participate. And it would just be this big, wonderful ceremony. And then it'd be over. We'll see you next year for Passover, Pentecost, and Sukkot once again. On this occasion, though, on this day, the last great day of the feast, while the people had a moment of silence, it's quiet. And then suddenly a voice, randomly, seemingly from nowhere anyone's prepared for. This is not formal. This was not scripted. No one's expecting this. Some voice just starts screaming out, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. He that believes on me, as the Scripture hath said," the Scripture which you've just been reading, the Scripture has said, "out of his belly shall flow rivers of living water." Can you appreciate the audacity of Jesus to do this here at this moment? We are people who are used to moments of silence. We have moments of quiet reflection. We stand and we have a moment of silence sometimes at ball games. If ever it coincides with like September 11th or something, usually the whole stadium full of spectators will take a moment and just be quiet for a second. And there'll be a flyover and we'll sing America the Beautiful and finally we'll play ball. Imagine if in the middle of that quiet moment, imagine if you're in like a smaller venue where you can be heard better, like at a high school gymnasium. Have a little moment of silence. And in that moment of silence, someone just randomly starts yelling out the invitation of the gospel. I have a preacher friend, this is a true story, a preacher friend who was celebrating his birthday in Memphis while he was in preaching school. And as one does at a birthday celebration in a restaurant, I think it was like a Chili's or something like that, everybody comes around with a happy birthday thing. So everyone rolls their eyes, they have to turn, they have to watch, they have to pretend like they care, though they don't know this person, and say happy birthday to them, then go back to their overpriced food. So that's what was happening there. So everybody turns and they look, and everyone's staring at this guy as they're singing happy birthday to him. And after the happy birthday is done, this guy, no fooling, hops up on his chair, stands up, and he says, "He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved." Mark 16:16. Because he figures, when am I ever going to have an audience full of Chili's people that I'll ever have again? I'll never have a crowd this big with this much attention on me. I'm going to use it to say, "He that believeth and is baptized shall be saved." Mark 16:16. That kind of audacity, that kind of uncouthness, that kind of, hey, we don't do that like that. That's not the way it's done, was just how Jesus rolled. Because he was already such a figure of notoriety that people didn't know if he was nuts, a good man, or God in the flesh. And here, he doesn't back down. He's been rejected and rejected and rejected and rejected again. And here's a moment of silence. When I speak, everyone's going to hear me. "I am this one who you're talking about," he says to himself. "I am the very one. I am the bringer of the water that the priests have been pouring out on the slab for 6 days straight. I am the one who will lead you to the better promised land. I am the better Moses. I am the better Aaron. I'm the bringer of the better law. I will give you all the better things, make the better promises. If anyone wants to have that, come to me, and out of your belly will flow rivers of water." I am him. He has that opportunity. He has that moment, and he takes it. because our Master, above all else, is an evangelist. He's a preacher. So what do we do with that? I want you to appreciate this holiday. We appreciate Passover. We watch the Ten Commandments every year. I used to watch it over the course of 2 nights on ABC back in the day. We know the Passover story. We're familiar with Pentecost, especially as Christians, as God's people. We're familiar with Pentecost. We associate it so much with Acts 2, so much so we sometimes forget that it was an Israelite holiday for centuries before that. We're not so much familiar with this one. But I guarantee you the Israelites, they loved this holiday. Passover, contemplative. They stop and they reflect on God's salvation. Pentecost, introspective. They stop and they appreciate that God has given them a law, has codified the terms and conditions of His relationship with them. But the Feast of Booths, celebratory. This is a time of rejoicing. God has brought us home. God has saved us. God has delivered us. God has kept His promises. Jesus says, I am that promise-keeping God. We Christians have the message of a promise-keeping God. And so we can look at the wandering and we can say, here are the things not to do. Here are the sins not to follow. Paul does that, 1 Corinthians 10. But we can also say, and at the end of their wandering, in spite of all their sins, they go and they take the promised land because God is a promise keeper. You follow the Lord. In spite of your sins, you keep following the Lord. You keep pressing forward and you will make it to your promised land. That's your application. You just keep talking to people. You keep telling people about the Lord. They will reject you. They will spit in your eye. They might even try to kill you as they did our Master, but you just keep on preaching. You keep on talking. You keep on using moments of silence to scream out the message of the gospel. And then at the end, you cross over into your promised land. We have crossed the Red Sea. We have gotten the law. We have wandered in a wilderness when we never should have had to do that in the first place. But we've done it. We've done our time. And now the land stretches before us. Obstacle 1 is the Jordan River. He'll split that, no problem. Obstacle 2 is Jericho. The big old walls of Jericho. What are we going to do? We're going to need some kind of a plan. And boy, howdy, does God have some kind of a plan. 2 words will be our theme for tomorrow. You want to pass through the river of Jordan? You want to overcome the mighty walls of Jericho? You want to win the promised land that God has promised you? You want it? 2 words. Trust and obey. We'll talk about that tomorrow night. Until then, go get your snack. Thank you all very much.